Welcome back to the channel, where we dive deep into the mysteries that continue to haunt the world and shape our understanding of truth and secrecy. Tonight, we begin a journey into one of the most heartbreaking and globally recognized cases of modern times. At the center of this story is a little girl just 3 years old whose name, even after so many years, still evokes sadness, questions, and endless debates. Madeleine McCann. Before we get into the complicated twists, rumors, and investigations, let us take a step back to the very beginning. Who was this child? And why did her disappearance capture the world's attention in a way that few other cases ever have? Madeleine McCann was not a public figure, not a celebrity, not someone who lived in the spotlight. She was a child, just like millions of others, curious, playful, and loved deeply by her family. Born in 2003 in England, Madeleine was the eldest daughter of Jerry and Kate McCann. Friends and relatives often described her as bright, energetic, and full of life, the kind of spirit that lights up a room. She loved to laugh, loved to play, and was especially close to her younger twin siblings. For her parents, she was a source of joy and pride. Like many families, they dreamed of giving their children happy memories, and in the spring of 2007, those dreams took them to the Algarve coast in Portugal, a destination known for its beaches, warm weather, and family-friendly resorts. No one could have predicted that this trip, intended to be filled with relaxation and laughter, would instead become the setting for one of the most infamous disappearances of our century. What makes this case stand out from countless other tragedies is the way it resonated far beyond one family's personal grief. Disappearances, sadly, happen all over the world, yet Madeleine's story became a global phenomenon. One reason is that her image was unforgettable. A small child with striking blue-green eyes and a distinctive mark in her right eye. When her face appeared on screens, posters, and newspapers, people everywhere felt an immediate connection. This was not an abstract case, it was the story of a very real child whose life had just begun. Another reason lies in the setting. The disappearance did not happen in an isolated place but in a modern European holiday town where families felt secure. If a child could vanish in such a setting, it forced people everywhere to ask themselves, if it could happen there, could it happen here too? And finally, the timing played a role. In 2007, global media networks were fast, and social media was beginning to rise. Within days, Madeleine's story had crossed borders, making her a household name in countries far beyond Portugal or the United Kingdom. For her parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, the tragedy was beyond imagination. They were ordinary people, a doctor and a heart specialist who simply wanted a short break from their demanding lives. They traveled with friends, also parents, and like many families on holiday, they relied on trust and routine. The adults dined at the resort's restaurant while their children slept in nearby apartments, checking in regularly. On that fateful evening, they believed they were making safe, responsible choices. They checked, they reassured themselves, and they thought their children were secure. But in the span of just minutes, their lives collapsed. One moment, they were sharing dinner. The next, they were facing every parent's greatest fear. When we talk about this case, we often get lost in theories, speculation, and investigation details. Yet, at the heart of it all, this is the story of a family ripped apart in an instant. For the McCanns, it was not just news headlines, it was their daughter, their child, the little girl whose laughter once filled their home. That perspective is crucial to remember, because it humanizes what might otherwise seem like a cold mystery. But Madeleine's disappearance became more than one family's tragedy. It turned into a symbol of vulnerability in modern life. Governments, law enforcement agencies, child protection groups, and ordinary citizens all reacted with shock. The case reminded the world that safety is fragile, that life can change without warning, and that innocence can vanish in a single night. For countless parents, it was a wake-up call that no precaution feels enough when the unthinkable happens. And this is why the name Madeleine McCann still lingers in headlines, documentaries, and conversations nearly 2 decades later. It is not only about what happened to one child, it is about what her disappearance revealed about our world, our fears, and our hope that one day, answers will be found. On the evening of May 3, 2007, in the quiet resort town of Praia da Luz in Portugal's Algarve region, the unimaginable happened. Madeleine McCann, just 3 years old, vanished from her family's holiday apartment. Up until that point, the day had been ordinary, filled with the simple joys of a family vacation. The McCanns had spent the day swimming, playing, and enjoying the relaxed atmosphere that drew so many visitors to the Algarve. The resort was designed for families, with activities for children and a sense of security that made parents feel comfortable enough to unwind. But as night fell, that sense of comfort shattered forever. The McCanns were traveling with a group of friends, most of whom were also parents. The adults had developed a routine during the trip, after putting their children to bed. They would gather for dinner at a tapas restaurant within the resort complex. The restaurant was only about 50 meters from the apartment where Madeleine and her twin siblings slept. It was not an unusual arrangement. Families on holiday often make decisions that balance relaxation with responsibility. To ease their minds, the parents agreed to take turns checking on the children at regular intervals throughout the evening. That night, everything seemed normal at first. The twins were asleep. Madeleine was in bed, and the adults felt confident that their children were safe. At approximately 10 p.m. Kate McCann went to check on her children. What she found in that moment would change the course of her life and ignite one of the largest missing persons investigations the world has ever seen. The window in the children's bedroom was open. The shutter was raised. And Madeleine's bed was empty. Panic set in immediately. Kate rushed back to the restaurant, shouting, "Madeleine's gone." The words cut through the night like a blade, sending shockwaves through the group of friends. They ran back to the apartment, searching every corner, calling out her name, hoping she might be hiding or had wandered off. But she was not there. The McCanns alerted the resort staff, and soon after, the local police. Within hours, news of a missing child began to spread through Praia da Luz, drawing neighbors, tourists, and staff into a frantic search that went late into the night. Despite the urgency, crucial mistakes were made in those early hours. The apartment was not immediately sealed off as a potential crime scene. Strangers wandered in and out, trying to help, but unknowingly contaminating what could have been vital evidence. Every passing minute made the situation more complicated. For the McCanns, the nightmare deepened with each unanswered call of Madeleine's name. By morning, the story was already spreading beyond the borders of Portugal. Local media reported on the missing British girl, and soon international outlets picked it up. The image of Madeleine's young face with her distinctive mark in her right eye was broadcast around the globe. Within days, millions of people knew her name. For many, this was the first time they had ever seen such a coordinated and international search effort for a missing child. Posters, campaigns, and even celebrities became involved in raising awareness. Madeleine's disappearance was not just a Portuguese story, it had become a global event. But while the media focused on headlines, for the McCann family, the pain was raw and immediate. Every parent can imagine the terror of looking into their child's bed and finding it empty. Every parent can feel the helplessness of searching and calling out, only to be met with silence. For Kate and Jerry, those moments were the beginning of years filled with hope, despair, and relentless searching for the truth. This moment, the night of May 3rd, marks the turning point where an ordinary family vacation transformed into one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries of our time. It is the night that not only changed the McCanns' lives forever but also shook the confidence of families everywhere who believed that such tragedies were rare, distant, or impossible in safe and familiar settings. Praia da Luz, the small seaside village where Madeleine disappeared, was not the kind of place anyone would expect to become the center of a worldwide mystery. Located in Portugal's Algarve region, it was and still is famous for its stunning beaches, whitewashed houses, and a tranquil atmosphere that attracts families from across Europe. In 2007, it was considered one of the safest holiday destinations. People came there for peace, relaxation, and the comfort of knowing their children could play freely while parents enjoyed the sunshine and good food. For many, Praia da Luz felt like a bubble of safety, far removed from the chaos of the wider world. The resort where the McCanns stayed, known as Ocean Club, catered specifically to families. It had swimming pools, play areas, tennis courts, and organized activities for children. Parents could relax knowing their kids were entertained and nearby. Everything about the place suggested security and community. Guests often mingled, shared meals, and watched out for one another's children. That sense of trust was woven into the experience of staying there. For Kate and Jerry McCann, it seemed like the perfect setting for a short, much-needed break from their demanding work schedules back in the UK. Praia da Luz itself was a picturesque town built around tourism. Narrow streets wound past small cafes and local shops, leading to the coastline where the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly. The beach was dotted with families during the day, while in the evenings, restaurants buzzed with travelers enjoying fresh seafood and wine. For locals, tourism was the lifeblood of the economy, and visitors were welcomed warmly. Safety and hospitality were part of the town's reputation. Nobody could have imagined that such a place would suddenly find itself in the international spotlight for all the wrong reasons. When Madeleine vanished, the idyllic image of Praia da Luz cracked instantly. Overnight, it transformed from a peaceful holiday destination into the focus of a massive police presence and relentless media attention. Streets that had once been quiet were filled with reporters, camera crews, and investigators. Locals who had lived their entire lives in the village were suddenly confronted with questions, suspicions, and the harsh glare of global scrutiny. Tourists, too, were shocked. Many had chosen Praia da Luz for its tranquility, only to find themselves in the middle of a nightmare unfolding before their eyes. The geography of the town also played a key role in shaping the case. Praia da Luz was small, surrounded by cliffs, winding roads, and a close-knit cluster of holiday apartments. Some argued that this environment made it difficult for anyone to disappear without being noticed. Others pointed out that the town's openness, visitors coming and going, apartments rented by strangers, staff working around the clock, could easily mask the movements of someone with darker intentions. The proximity of the McCann apartment to the restaurant where the adults dined, a mere 50 meters, symbolized the fragile boundary between safety and danger. What seemed like a reasonable arrangement at the time became the center of endless debate. Was it too far to leave the children alone? Was it safe to assume that nothing could go wrong in a family-friendly resort? For the people of Praia da Luz, the case was not just a tragedy for one family, it disrupted the very identity of their community. Locals had to live with the constant presence of police checkpoints, journalists questioning everyone, and suspicions falling on neighbors and workers who had never before been under such scrutiny. The disappearance of one child had cast a shadow over the entire town, turning a peaceful fishing village into a place forever linked with loss and unanswered questions. What made this even more striking was how the beauty of Praia da Luz stood in contrast to the horror of what had happened. The sun still rose over golden beaches. Children still played in the waves, and tourists still strolled along the streets, but the name Praia da Luz would never again be spoken without recalling the haunting mystery of May 3, 2007. It became impossible to separate the postcard-perfect image of the town from the tragedy that unfolded there. As investigations expanded, the geography of Praia da Luz continued to matter. Police combed through alleys, searched nearby villas, and questioned locals about unusual activity. The surrounding cliffs and countryside were examined, helicopters hovered overhead, and divers scoured parts of the coastline. Yet despite these efforts, no trace of Madeleine was found. The town itself seemed to hold on to its secrets, a silent witness to a disappearance that baffled even the most experienced investigators. Praia da Luz was supposed to be a safe haven for families. Instead, it became the stage for a mystery that would define it in the eyes of the world. Even today, nearly 2 decades later, when people hear the name of this small Portuguese village, their first thought is not of beaches or sunshine, it is of the unanswered question. What happened to Madeleine McCann? The McCann family's holiday apartment at the Ocean Club was meant to be a place of rest, laughter, and safety. It was one of many identical units in the complex, simple, practical, and comfortable for families who came to enjoy the Algarve sunshine. Apartment 5A, where the McCanns stayed, was located on the ground floor. From the outside, it looked ordinary: white walls, a small patio, windows with shutters, and easy access to the surrounding gardens and pathways that wound through the resort. Nothing about it suggested that it would one day be the focus of one of the most infamous missing child investigations in modern history. Inside the apartment, the layout was straightforward. There was a living area, a small kitchen, and bedrooms. Madeleine shared a room with her younger twin siblings, who slept in cots, while she rested in a bed close to the window. It was a space where children played with toys during the day and where exhausted parents tucked them in at night after a long day under the sun. For Kate and Jerry McCann, that apartment was supposed to be a sanctuary, a temporary home where their children would be safe while they recharged with friends nearby. On the evening of May 3, 2007, this sense of safety vanished. After putting their children to bed, Kate and Jerry joined their friends for dinner at the tapas restaurant within the resort. The restaurant was close enough that they could see the apartment block, and the group agreed to check on their children at regular intervals throughout the night. This arrangement was a compromise: the adults could socialize, but they would also keep their children in mind. At around 10 p.m. when Kate returned to the apartment for her check, she walked into a scene that no parent ever wants to imagine. The bedroom window was open. The shutter had been raised. The twins were still in their cots, sleeping soundly. But Madeleine's bed was empty. The sight was both surreal and horrifying. In a place where everything had seemed under control, something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. Kate's reaction was immediate. She rushed back to the restaurant, her voice carrying across the night, "Madeleine's gone." Those words shattered the evening's calm and set off a chain of panic that spread through the group of friends and into the resort itself. People ran to the apartment, searching frantically, calling Madeleine's name, checking every corner, every cupboard, every closet. They hoped she had wandered off, maybe into another room or onto the patio. But she was nowhere to be found. The holiday apartment, so ordinary just hours earlier, suddenly became a crime scene. Neighbors, tourists, and staff poured in to help, but their presence unintentionally compromised potential evidence. People walked across the floor, touched doors and windows, and left behind traces that would later make forensic analysis difficult. In the rush to find a missing child, nobody thought about preserving the scene. The focus was on searching, on hoping that maybe she was still nearby. For investigators, the holiday apartment became the focal point of endless questions. How could someone enter a room with 3 children and leave unnoticed? Was the open window a sign of forced entry, or had it been left that way earlier? Had anyone seen or heard something unusual that evening? The simplicity of the apartment made the disappearance even harder to understand. It was not a sprawling house with hidden exits or multiple floors. It was a compact ground floor space where every sound should have been noticeable, every movement detectable. In the weeks and months that followed, the apartment itself became a symbol. Images of apartment 5A appeared in newspapers and on television screens worldwide. The open window with the raised shutter was replayed over and over as a haunting reminder of that night. To many, it represented the fragility of safety, the thin line between normality and disaster. The fact that Madeleine vanished from such an ordinary place made the story resonate even more deeply with families everywhere. After all, if a child could disappear from a holiday apartment in a family-friendly resort, then nowhere felt truly safe. For the McCanns, the apartment was both a memory and a wound. It was where they had last seen their daughter, where they had tucked her into bed, and where their lives had changed forever. Every corner of that space was tied to a moment of loss, a moment that replayed in their minds endlessly. Even years later, photographs of the apartment evoke emotions of grief, guilt, and unanswered questions. The holiday apartment should have been unremarkable, just one of many identical spaces rented by families looking for sun and rest. Instead, it became infamous, its details scrutinized by detectives, journalists, and armchair investigators around the world. Apartment 5A was no longer just a temporary home. It was now a silent witness to a mystery that has remained unsolved for nearly 2 decades. While the children slept in apartment 5A, Kate and Jerry McCann joined their friends for dinner at the resort's tapas restaurant. This decision, so ordinary at the time, would later become one of the most scrutinized aspects of the entire case. The restaurant was located only about 50 meters away, within the Ocean Club complex, and from the table where the adults sat, they could see the apartment block where their children were sleeping. For many parents on holiday, this seemed like a reasonable balance: enjoy a meal with friends while keeping a close eye on the children. But that short distance, the span of a swimming pool and a garden path, became the dividing line between safety and tragedy. The McCanns were not alone. They were part of a group of friends, often referred to in the media as the Tapas 7. This included several other couples who also had young children sleeping in nearby apartments. Together, they had developed a routine during the holiday: put the children to bed, then meet at the restaurant to relax, to reassure themselves. The adults agreed to check on the children at regular intervals, each parent taking turns walking back to their apartment to peek inside and confirm all was well. It was a system based on trust, routine, and the belief that the resort was a safe environment. That evening, conversation flowed easily. The group was enjoying good food, drinks, and the rare chance to unwind without constant childcare duties. Kate and Jerry, like the others, felt they had earned a moment of calm after a day spent playing with their kids under the Portuguese sun. For them, this was not neglect, it was a compromise. A way to recharge while still fulfilling their parental responsibilities. Every 20 to 30 minutes, one of the adults would quietly excuse themselves, walk back to the apartment, and return with a reassuring update: everything's fine. But in hindsight, this arrangement became the focus of intense criticism and debate. Many argued that the children were left too vulnerable, that even a few minutes away was too risky. Others sympathized, pointing out that the restaurant was within shouting distance, and that most parents, in a relaxed holiday setting, might have made the same choice. The question of whether the McCanns were irresponsible has haunted them ever since, overshadowing the fact that they were also victims of an unimaginable crime. At around 9:05 p.m. Jerry left the table to check on the children. He later reported that everything was normal. Madeleine was asleep. The twins were undisturbed, and nothing seemed out of place. On his way back to the restaurant, he encountered another guest staying at the resort, who also noted seeing Jerry return. This detail would later become important in reconstructing the timeline of the evening. At approximately 9:30 p.m. another member of the group went to check and also reported that all appeared well. It was not until around 10 p.m., when Kate made her turn to check, that the nightmare unfolded. She entered the bedroom, saw the window open, the shutter raised, and Madeleine's bed empty. The twins slept peacefully, oblivious to the chaos that was about to erupt. In that instant, the dinner, the laughter, and the calm atmosphere shattered. Kate ran back to the restaurant in panic, shouting the words that would echo around the world. Madeleine's gone. The tapas dinner, once a simple gathering of friends, became a focal point for investigators and the media. Journalists dissected every detail. Who went back to check at what time, what they saw, how much they drank, and how often they looked in on the children. Police attempted to reconstruct the evening minute by minute, searching for gaps, inconsistencies, or missed opportunities. Every action of the parents was scrutinized not only as part of the investigation but also in the harsh court of public opinion. For the McCanns, the guilt of that night has lingered ever since. They have often spoken about how they wish they had made different choices, perhaps staying in the apartment, or hiring a babysitter, or eating indoors. But hindsight offers no comfort. What seemed like a safe, reasonable decision at the time became the detail that would forever haunt their lives. The irony is striking. The parents were only a short walk away, checking in regularly, believing they were being cautious. Yet those few minutes of absence were enough for something irreversible to happen. The Tapas restaurant, a place meant for relaxation, now holds a permanent place in the narrative of loss. For many observers, it became the symbol of that fragile balance between trust and danger, between ordinary choices and extraordinary consequences. And so, while Kate and Jerry sat at the table that night laughing, talking, and thinking their children were safe, the course of their lives was quietly being altered forever. The holiday apartment was no longer secure, the window no longer closed, and Madeleine was no longer where she should have been. In the space of a dinner, the McCanns crossed an invisible threshold from ordinary parents on holiday to the central figures in one of the most haunting mysteries of our time. Inside apartment 5A, the night began quietly, just like so many before. Madeleine McCann lay in her small bed, dressed for sleep, while her two younger siblings, the twins, just 2 years old, rested peacefully in their cots. For Kate and Jerry, the bedtime routine had been uneventful. The children were tired from a long day in the sun, splashing in the pool and running about the resort. By 8:30 p.m. they were tucked in, the lights dimmed, and the holiday apartment had fallen into silence. It was this calm, ordinary moment that gave the parents confidence to join their friends at the nearby restaurant. After all, their 3 children were safe, close by, and together in the same room. Madeleine's role as the eldest child was significant. At just 3 years old, she had a sense of awareness her younger siblings did not yet possess. Friends and family often said she was protective of the twins, keeping an eye on them in her own way. For Kate and Jerry, this gave them an added layer of reassurance. They were not just leaving 3 children alone, they believed Madeleine's presence, in a sense, anchored the room. She was old enough to call out if something was wrong, old enough to sense if the twins were restless or upset. In their minds, the arrangement was not reckless, it was practical, balanced, and done with love. The twins, Sean and Amelie, were too young to remember much of that night. They slept soundly through the entire ordeal, unaware of the chaos around them. Even when Kate discovered Madeleine missing, even when people rushed in and out of the apartment, the twins remained asleep in their cots. That image, 2 toddlers resting peacefully in the same room where their sister vanished, became one of the most haunting details of the entire case. It raised endless questions. How could someone have entered without waking them? How could they be left untouched while Madeleine disappeared? Was it chance, intention, or something else entirely? For investigators, the fact that all 3 children were together in the same room complicated the mystery. If the disappearance was the result of a kidnapping, why was only 1 child taken? The twins were physically easier to carry, and yet they remained unharmed. Some theorists suggested that Madeleine, being older, was specifically targeted. Others argued it pointed to an opportunistic act, that the abductor happened upon the situation and chose quickly, without disturbing the others. Still others speculated that the very fact the twins were left behind might have been meant to reduce suspicion or panic in the early moments, giving the perpetrator more time to escape. From a parent's perspective, the room was meant to be secure. The shutters were down, the windows closed, the door ajar so that air could circulate. The McCanns had relied on the environment, the short distance to the restaurant, and their system of regular checks. In their minds, their children were protected. But this fragile sense of security unraveled in an instant. When Kate returned around 10 p.m. and saw the empty bed, the sight of the twins sleeping quietly beside it must have been both a relief and a torment. 2 of her children were safe, but her eldest, her firstborn, was gone. The presence of the twins also became part of the timeline reconstruction. When Jerry checked on the children at 9:05 p.m., all 3 were still in the room. When another friend, Matthew Oldfield, checked around 9:30 p.m., he later admitted he did not look closely enough to confirm Madeleine's presence, but he heard no noise, no sign of disturbance. By 10 p.m., the twins remained in their cots, but Madeleine was gone. That narrow time frame became critical to the investigation. Whoever had entered the room did so quickly, silently, and with extraordinary precision, without waking the twins or alerting passers-by. In the aftermath, the image of 3 children in one room, 2 safe, 1 missing, became symbolic of the randomness of tragedy. It underscored how thin the line is between normality and chaos. 1 child was taken, 2 were left behind, and a family's life was split forever. For Kate and Jerry, the twins became their lifeline in the darkest days that followed. They were living reminders of the family they still had. But they were also constant reminders of the daughter who was missing. As the years went by, Sean and Amelie grew older, their lives inevitably shaped by the absence of the sister who had once slept beside them. From a wider perspective, the detail that Madeleine vanished while sharing a room with her siblings made the case resonate with parents everywhere. It challenged the assumption that being close by, within a group, or in a family-friendly environment was enough to guarantee safety. It raised questions about what it means to protect children, what risks are acceptable, and how quickly circumstances can change. The fact that she disappeared from a room where 2 other children remained unharmed only deepened the sense of mystery and unease. In the end, that room in apartment 5A remains etched into history as the last place Madeleine was seen. It was a space filled with innocence, 3 children sleeping peacefully on a family holiday. Yet it became a place marked by fear, loss, and unanswered questions. The twins, untouched and asleep, symbolize both the fragility of safety and the enduring hope that, even in the midst of tragedy, life continues. For the McCanns, that night was not only about losing Madeleine, it was about the cruel contrast of having 2 children safe and one gone forever. Almost overnight, Madeleine's disappearance transformed from a local police matter into an international headline. In the hours immediately following Kate's desperate cry that her daughter was gone, the focus was on frantic searches around the Ocean Club resort. Staff members, tourists, and locals combed through gardens, alleys, and nearby streets. But by the next morning, newspapers in Portugal were already reporting the case. And within days, Madeleine's face had appeared on television screens across Europe and beyond. What made the case spread so quickly was a combination of timing, image, and human emotion. In 2007, international news cycles were accelerating, with 24-hour networks hungry for stories that resonated with audiences everywhere. Madeleine's disappearance fit that mold perfectly: a young child, a picturesque resort town, distraught parents, and an air of mystery. Her photograph, showing her distinctive blue-green eyes and the unique mark in her right eye, was powerful in itself. It humanized the story instantly. Viewers did not see an abstract case of a missing child. They saw Madeleine, a real little girl whose innocence had been shattered. Soon, the British press became heavily involved. Madeleine's family were from the UK, and British tabloids gave the case front-page treatment. The story carried all the elements that sell newspapers: suspense, tragedy, and unanswered questions. Television broadcasters ran rolling updates, interviews with neighbors, and live reports from Praia da Luz. As the days stretched into weeks, reporters from across the globe descended on the Algarve. Praia da Luz, once a quiet seaside retreat, suddenly became the center of a media storm, with cameras flashing, journalists crowding the streets, and satellite trucks parked along the beachfront. The intensity of the coverage amplified public interest. Strangers across the world felt emotionally invested. Parents saw their own children reflected in Madeleine's face. Communities organized vigils and prayer circles. Posters and flyers with Madeleine's image were printed in multiple languages and distributed not only across Portugal and the UK but in airports, train stations, and tourist hubs worldwide. Airlines even displayed her picture, hoping that international travelers might spot her. What began as a desperate local search became a global campaign. Find Madeleine. Part of this transformation was due to the McCanns themselves. Kate and Jerry, though devastated, made a conscious decision to engage the media. They understood that publicity could keep the search alive, pressure authorities to act, and potentially bring in leads. They gave interviews, held press conferences, and worked with organizations to spread awareness. Their decision was controversial. Some accused them of being too composed, too willing to appear on camera, but it was a strategy born of desperation. For them, silence was not an option. As coverage spread, celebrities and public figures joined the effort. Well-known personalities lent their voices, urging the public not to forget Madeleine. The Pope met with the McCanns during a visit to Rome, giving the case a religious and moral dimension. Politicians, athletes, and entertainers amplified the message. A child was missing, and the world needed to help. Rarely had a single disappearance captured such widespread attention. But international attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it ensured that Madeleine's case never faded into obscurity. Leads poured in from across continents: sightings in Spain, Morocco, even Australia. Each tip gave the family a flicker of hope, though most were dead ends. On the other hand, the saturation of media fueled speculation, conspiracy theories, and criticism. Every detail of the McCanns' behavior was dissected: what they ate, what they wore, how they spoke. Instead of sympathy, the couple sometimes faced suspicion, with newspapers running stories that blurred the line between fact and rumor. For Praia da Luz, the media circus was overwhelming. The small town, built on tourism, suddenly had reporters knocking on doors, photographers following residents, and outsiders asking intrusive questions. Local businesses suffered as the village's name became synonymous with tragedy rather than relaxation. For many locals, their peaceful home was stolen by the storm of international coverage. And yet, the scale of the attention underscored something universal: the story of a missing child resonates across all borders, cultures, and languages. It taps into a primal fear, the vulnerability of innocence, and the shared hope that somehow, against the odds, the child will be found. Madeleine's case became not just about one girl, but about the fragility of safety everywhere. It was a reminder that tragedy can strike even in the most ordinary moments, and that no family is entirely shielded from it. By the end of May 2007, just weeks after the disappearance, Madeleine McCann was one of the most recognized names in the world. Her face was on posters from Lisbon to London, her story replayed endlessly on television, and her parents' pleas echoed across continents. The disappearance had crossed from a single family's nightmare into a global obsession, setting the stage for years of investigation, speculation, and unresolved grief. As the days turned into weeks, it became clear that Madeleine's case was not going to fade away like so many other missing child stories. Instead, it grew into one of the most high-profile disappearances in modern history. What set it apart was not only the circumstances of the event but also the way the world reacted. It was not just a family and a community searching, it was entire nations watching, discussing, and even arguing about what had happened to one small girl in Portugal. The scale of the investigation itself was unprecedented for a missing child case. Portuguese police launched an extensive search operation, bringing in local officers, K9 units, and even border patrols. Roads were checked, cars were stopped, and areas around Praia da Luz were combed repeatedly. Helicopters circled above, and divers searched sections of the coast. In the United Kingdom, police forces quickly became involved as well, offering assistance and resources. What might have remained a regional police matter transformed into a multinational effort. At the same time, media coverage ensured that Madeleine's name remained constantly in the public eye. Newspapers around the world ran daily updates. Television networks devoted entire segments to analyzing timelines, theories, and witness statements. Even when there was no new information, journalists filled the gaps with speculation. This constant exposure ensured that Madeleine's face was recognized across continents, from Europe to Asia to the Americas. Parents in faraway countries who had never heard of Praia da Luz knew Madeleine's name and recognized her image. But the media attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it created immense pressure on law enforcement to deliver answers. On the other, it fueled rumors, accusations, and wild theories. Every detail of the McCanns' lives was scrutinized, from their decision to dine at the tapas restaurant to their body language in press conferences. The family found themselves not only victims of a crime but also subjects of global judgment. For many observers, sympathy turned into suspicion, and debates erupted about parental responsibility, media ethics, and the line between reporting and exploitation. Despite the criticism, the McCanns made a deliberate choice to keep the case in the spotlight. They believed correctly that public awareness was their strongest weapon. Working with advisors, they launched the Find Madeleine campaign. They traveled across Europe to raise awareness, met with politicians and religious leaders, and even secured an audience with the Pope. They spoke openly about their grief but also about their determination, using every platform they could to keep the world engaged. This level of organization and persistence was rare, and it helped ensure that Madeleine's case remained active in ways most missing child cases do not. Financial resources also played a role. Donations poured in from around the world, allowing the family to hire private investigators when official efforts slowed. These investigators pursued leads across continents, sightings in Morocco, reports from Spain, claims from strangers who thought they had seen Madeleine in airports, on streets, or even in distant countries like Australia. While most of these leads amounted to nothing, they kept the hope alive and the case in motion. The global scale of the case meant that Madeleine's disappearance began to influence wider conversations. Governments revisited policies about child safety in tourist areas. Airports and border control systems were scrutinized. Awareness campaigns about missing children gained momentum, often using Madeleine's case as a rallying point. Her story became not just about one girl but about a broader issue: the vulnerability of children and the responsibilities of communities to protect them. At the same time, the case highlighted cultural differences in how societies perceive parental choices and responsibility. In some places, the McCanns were seen as ordinary parents who made a reasonable decision under safe-seeming circumstances. In others, they were harshly criticized, even blamed, for leaving their children unattended. These debates extended far beyond the family itself, touching on questions of parenting, trust, and modern lifestyles. For Praia da Luz, the global attention was transformative. The small town, once anonymous to most outsiders, became forever associated with Madeleine's disappearance. For years afterward, tourists who visited the Algarve often thought of the case, sometimes even traveling to see the Ocean Club apartment for themselves. For locals, the association was painful, as their home was permanently linked with tragedy and suspicion. In the years that followed, the case remained a fixture in documentaries, books, and television specials. Each anniversary brought renewed coverage, fresh appeals for information, and reminders that Madeleine had still not been found. Unlike so many missing persons cases that fade quietly into obscurity, hers persisted, anchored by the relentless determination of her parents and the world's enduring fascination. By the end of 2007, it was clear that Madeleine McCann's disappearance was no longer just a missing child story. It was a cultural phenomenon, one of the most high-profile and widely discussed mysteries of the 21st century. It had become a case that symbolized not only the heartbreak of one family but also the fears, hopes, and obsessions of millions of strangers around the world. From the very beginning, Madeleine's disappearance was surrounded by uncertainty, and where there is uncertainty, theories inevitably emerge. Within days of May 3, 2007, speculation began to swirl not only among the investigators and the media, but also within the public. People wanted explanations, and when answers were not forthcoming, they began to create their own. Over time, three dominant theories came to define the debate: abduction, trafficking, and accidental cover-up. Each carried its own logic, its own evidence, and its own controversies, shaping how the world understood the case. The first and perhaps most widely accepted theory was that Madeleine had been abducted. This idea took root almost immediately, fueled by the open bedroom window and raised shutter. If someone had broken into the apartment and taken Madeleine, the physical details fit: an intruder entering quietly, removing one child, and leaving the others untouched. Witness statements seemed to support this. One holidaymaker reported seeing a man carrying a small child in the vicinity around the time Madeleine disappeared. Others claimed they noticed suspicious activity near the resort in the days prior. Abduction by a stranger was terrifying but, in many ways, the simplest explanation: someone came in, took Madeleine, and disappeared into the night. Closely linked to the abduction theory was the possibility of human trafficking. Portugal, like other coastal European countries, has had its share of concerns about organized criminal networks. Some speculated that Madeleine had been targeted in advance because of her appearance: blonde, blue-eyed, and highly recognizable. Trafficking rings, operating across borders, could potentially spirit a child away within hours, making it nearly impossible for local police to track. This theory gained traction as reports of possible sightings came in from Morocco, Spain, and even further afield. Each time a child resembling Madeleine was spotted, hope surged, only to fade when the lead proved false. Still, the idea that she had been taken not just by an individual but by an organized group kept the case alive internationally. The third, and most controversial, theory was that of an accidental cover-up. This idea suggested that Madeleine had not been abducted at all, but had died in the apartment as the result of an accident. Proponents of this theory argued that her parents, fearing blame, may have covered up what happened. The Portuguese police at one point considered this seriously, even designating the McCanns as arguidos, or official suspects. Forensic tests were carried out on traces found in the apartment and in a rental car the family used weeks later, though results were inconclusive. To this day, no definitive evidence has ever supported the cover-up theory, but it persisted in the public imagination. Fueled by media speculation and a climate of suspicion, this narrative cast a long shadow over the McCanns, forcing them to defend themselves again and again in the court of public opinion. Each theory brought with it deep emotional consequences. For those who believed in abduction, there was horror at the thought of a child taken from her bed by a stranger. For those who leaned toward trafficking, the fear was magnified by the possibility of a network so powerful that it could erase a child without leaving a trace. And for those who accepted the cover-up theory, there was anger and mistrust, a belief that perhaps the truth was closer to home and deliberately hidden. The theories also divided public perception. Some people felt unwavering sympathy for the McCanns, convinced they were victims of a terrible crime. Others grew suspicious, interpreting their media appearances as too polished, too composed. In reality, their decision to remain visible was strategic. They needed publicity to keep the case alive, but it left them open to criticism. The debate over theories often said as much about the people discussing the case as it did about the evidence itself. Investigators faced immense pressure as they tried to weigh these competing possibilities. Portuguese police pursued leads of suspicious vehicles and strangers in town. British investigators, later brought in, emphasized abduction as the most likely explanation. Private investigators hired by the McCanns chased down reports from across Europe and North Africa. Yet, despite thousands of leads, none produced the breakthrough everyone hoped for. Theories remained theories, haunting, compelling, but unproven. One of the most troubling aspects of these theories is how they kept hope and doubt intertwined. If Madeleine had been abducted or trafficked, there was always the possibility, however slim, that she might still be alive somewhere. If her disappearance was the result of an accident and cover-up, the hope of her return was gone, replaced by the grim desire for truth and accountability. The lack of closure meant that the family and the public alike lived in a state of constant uncertainty, caught between hope and despair. Over time, these theories became the foundation for documentaries, books, and endless online discussions. Entire communities formed around dissecting timelines, analyzing witness statements, and debating motives. For some, it became less about Madeleine herself and more about the mystery, the puzzle that refused to be solved. Yet behind all the speculation was always the same central fact. A 3-year-old girl had vanished, and her fate remained unknown. To this day, the abduction, trafficking, and accidental cover-up theories continue to shape how people think about the case. None have been definitively proven. None have been definitively disproven. They exist as possibilities, shadows of truth that may never be fully illuminated. And for the McCanns, the weight of these theories has been unbearable, caught between being seen as grieving parents and being scrutinized as potential suspects, all while living with the most painful reality of all, not knowing what happened to their daughter. Despite the enormous spotlight, the millions of eyes watching, and the relentless work of both official and private investigators, not a single trace of Madeleine McCann was ever definitively found. This absence of evidence is what makes the case so haunting, because in a world where information spreads rapidly and surveillance is everywhere, it seems impossible that a 3-year-old child could simply vanish without leaving behind even the smallest clue. Yet, that is exactly what happened. From the very first night, police and volunteers searched the immediate area. They combed through streets, alleys, and gardens in Praia da Luz. Dogs trained to detect scents were brought in. The coastline was surveyed, cars were stopped at roadblocks, and people living nearby were interviewed. And still nothing. No discarded clothing, no footprints that could be linked, no signs of struggle. The bedroom where Madeleine had slept showed only an open window and a raised shutter. These details were suggestive but not conclusive. They told investigators that someone may have entered. But they did not reveal who, why, or how. As days passed, the search widened. The Portuguese police requested assistance from Interpol and Europol, alerting border checkpoints in case someone attempted to leave the country with a child. Flyers were distributed in airports across Europe. Police in Spain, just a short drive away, were put on alert. Still, no reliable sightings were confirmed. Each lead, when examined closely, dissolved into disappointment. Over the following months, tips poured in from around the world. People claimed to see children who resembled Madeleine in shopping centers, airports, even on trains and ferries. Some were convinced they had spotted her in Morocco, walking with an unidentified woman. Others believed they saw her in Malta, in France, or as far away as South America. Each sighting sparked headlines, raising hope for a brief moment. But every time investigators followed up, the reports led nowhere. The children in question were identified, and none of them were Madeleine. The lack of physical evidence frustrated both investigators and the public. Forensic tests carried out in the McCann's apartment and later on a car they rented weeks after the disappearance produced ambiguous results. Some early reports suggested traces of blood or DNA, but when tested more thoroughly, the results were inconclusive. Nothing tied conclusively to Madeleine was found. No object, no clothing, no confirmed DNA sample outside the family home. This vacuum of evidence made it nearly impossible to construct a clear narrative. The absence of clues also allowed speculation to thrive. Every gap in the investigation became fertile ground for theories. If there was no trace, did that mean she had been swiftly removed by organized traffickers? If the apartment yielded nothing, did that mean it had been cleaned deliberately, or did it mean, as some suggested, that there had been no intruder at all? And that something else had happened inside the apartment, without evidence. Every possibility seemed both plausible and impossible. What makes Madeleine's disappearance especially haunting is that high-profile cases usually leave trails. In most missing child cases, even if the ending is tragic, there are signs, witnesses, physical evidence, or eventually, discoveries that bring answers. In Madeleine's case, the trail ended almost as soon as it began. The window was open, a child was missing, and from that point onward, the story became a void. The scale of the investigation only highlights the mystery. British police later dedicated one of their largest overseas operations, Operation Grange, to re-examining every detail of the case. Tens of millions of pounds were spent, dozens of detectives pored over documents, and thousands of interviews were reviewed. And yet, even with modern technology, advanced DNA analysis, and access to international databases, no breakthrough was achieved. The conclusion remained the same: Madeleine McCann had vanished, and no trace of her had ever been confirmed. For the McCanns, this absence was the most unbearable part. Parents who lose a child in an accident or illness have the heartbreak of loss, but they also have certainty. Parents of missing children live in the torment of not knowing. Every day, they wonder if their child is alive, if she is being cared for, if she is frightened, or if she is gone forever. For Kate and Jerry, every unconfirmed sighting was both a lifeline and a wound. Hope rose and fell in cycles, leaving them emotionally exhausted but never allowing them to fully grieve. The public, too, struggled with this void. The absence of answers turned the case into a cultural obsession. Documentaries revisited the same sparse details again and again, stretching them into competing narratives. Internet forums filled with debates, theories, and arguments about what must have happened. People clung to their preferred explanations not because the evidence was strong, but because the absence of evidence demanded something to fill the silence. And that silence, the simple fact that no trace of Madeleine has ever been found, is what gives the case its chilling power. It is not only the story of a missing child. It is the story of how, in the modern world of surveillance cameras, forensic labs, and global communication, a child could vanish as if swallowed by the air itself. It challenges our sense of safety and our belief that mysteries can always be solved if only we search hard enough. Nearly 2 decades later, despite all the investigations, appeals, and technological advances, the central fact remains unchanged: no confirmed evidence of Madeleine McCann's fate has ever been discovered. That truth, stark, painful, and unresolved, continues to haunt her family, puzzle investigators, and grip the imagination of people around the world. From the moment Madeleine vanished, the search for answers never truly stopped. What began as a frantic local investigation soon grew into a complex, multinational case that has stretched on for more than a decade. Few missing child cases have ever been pursued with such persistence and such global attention. And yet the fact that no clear resolution has been reached makes the ongoing investigation one of the most remarkable and frustrating features of this mystery. In the early days, the Portuguese police, known as the Polícia Judiciária, led the inquiry. Their immediate priority was to find Madeleine as quickly as possible, operating under the belief that the first hours and days are critical in any disappearance. Search dogs were deployed, officers went door to door, and border alerts were issued. Yet, with each passing day, hopes of a swift recovery dimmed. As weeks turned into months, the investigation became more complicated, weighed down by media scrutiny, political pressure, and international involvement. By the summer of 2007, the case had become a diplomatic issue between Portugal and the United Kingdom. British police were eager to assist, offering expertise and resources, while Portuguese authorities were determined to maintain control over the investigation within their jurisdiction. This tension sometimes created friction, with each side occasionally criticizing the other's approach. The Portuguese were accused of being too slow and uncoordinated. while the British were accused of interfering and undermining the local investigation. In September 2007, the investigation took a dramatic turn when Portuguese police officially named Kate and Gerry McCann as arguidos, or formal suspects. This decision shocked the world. The parents, who had tirelessly campaigned to keep the search alive, now found themselves under suspicion. For several months, the McCanns lived under the cloud of accusation, facing harsh judgment in the press and relentless speculation about whether they had been involved in their daughter's disappearance. However, in 2008, Portuguese authorities dropped their arguido status due to a lack of evidence, and the case was officially archived. But archived did not mean forgotten. The McCanns refused to give up. They hired private investigators, pursued new leads, and continued to work with media outlets to keep Madeleine's story alive. Their persistence paid off in 2011 when the British government, under pressure from public opinion and appeals from the family, launched its own inquiry. Scotland Yard opened Operation Grange, a review, and later a full investigation of all available evidence. Operation Grange was one of the most significant undertakings in the history of the Metropolitan Police. Dozens of officers were assigned. Thousands of documents were re-examined, and interviews were conducted across multiple countries. The aim was to strip the case back to its foundations and rebuild it from scratch, eliminating inconsistencies and pursuing overlooked leads. For years, British detectives worked alongside Portuguese authorities, though cooperation was sometimes uneven. The investigation brought moments of renewed hope. In 2013, police released e-fit images of men seen in the area on the night of the disappearance, sparking fresh appeals to the public. In 2014, large-scale searches were carried out in Praia da Luz, including digging in specific areas. In 2017, on the 10th anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance, Scotland Yard stated that they still believed there were significant lines of inquiry worth pursuing. Each announcement reignited public attention, though none produced the breakthrough everyone longed for. In 2020, another dramatic development occurred when German prosecutors identified a convicted criminal living in Germany as a prime suspect. They suggested they had evidence to believe Madeleine was dead and that this individual was responsible. For a brief moment, it seemed as if closure might finally be within reach. Yet, as of today, no definitive proof has been presented, and no charges have been filed in connection with her disappearance. Once again, the case remains unresolved, suspended between possibility and uncertainty. The persistence of the investigation is unusual. Many missing child cases lose momentum within months or years, but Madeleine's case continues to command resources nearly 2 decades later. This endurance speaks not only to the dedication of investigators but also to the relentless efforts of her parents. Kate and Gerry's refusal to let the world forget their daughter has kept the pressure on authorities, ensuring that the file remains open, the evidence continues to be reviewed, and potential leads are not ignored. At the same time, the length of the investigation has created fatigue, both for the public and for law enforcement. Millions of pounds have been spent. Thousands of hours invested, yet the outcome is the same: no trace of Madeleine, no clear answers. For critics, this raises questions about the allocation of resources, especially when so many other missing children cases receive far less attention. For supporters, it is a testament to persistence and to the idea that every missing child deserves to be searched for until the truth is found. The fact that the case has remained under investigation for more than a decade underscores just how extraordinary it is. Madeleine's disappearance is not only a mystery but a global story that refuses to end. Each year brings new appeals, new speculation, and sometimes new suspects, but never the resolution that everyone longs for. The investigation has endured through changes in governments, shifts in police leadership, and evolving forensic technology, but its central question remains the same: what happened to Madeleine McCann on the night of May 3, 2007? This unanswered question is why the case continues to matter. It is why investigators keep returning to the evidence, why journalists continue to cover anniversaries, and why the public still follows every update. The persistence of the investigation is a reflection of the persistence of hope that even after all these years, the truth can still be uncovered. And so, we have reached the end of the haunting journey into the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, one of the greatest modern unsolved mysteries. From that fateful night in Praia da Luz to decades of international investigations. From controversial theories to the endless silence of unanswered questions, we are left with a painful truth, even in a world filled with advanced technology and constant information. Some mysteries remain unsolved. This story is not only about a missing child, but also a reminder of how fragile safety can be, of the boundless love of parents, and of hope, fragile yet never extinguished. Wherever she may be, Madeleine remains a symbol of an unfinished story, and a call to the world to never stop searching for the truth. Thank you all for following today's story. If you found this meaningful, do not forget to share your thoughts, hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue uncovering more mysteries together. See you in the next video.